There are prayers in the Bible that thundered with words, but there are others that were uttered in silence, prayers with no voice, no sound, yet they shook heaven and changed history. We live in a noisy world, but the Bible teaches us that some of the greatest victories were birthed not in shouts, but in silent cries of the heart. These prayers reveal that God hears not just what comes from our lips, but what flows from the deepest chambers of our soul. Hannah's lips moved, but no sound came forth. To those around her, it was strange, even offensive. Eli the priest misjudged her, thinking she was drunk. Yet in that moment, what appeared foolish to man was sacred to God, for in her silence, her soul was pouring out more than words could ever carry. She was barren, her womb closed, mocked by her rival, weighed down by disappointment, yet she refused to give up. Instead, she turned her pain into prayer, her anguish into intercession. No one could hear her, but God did. And heaven was moved. This is the mystery. Your prayer does not have to be articulate, polished, or audible to reach the throne of the Almighty. Sometimes the prayer that changes everything is the one that never leaves your lips, but is cried from the depth of your being. Hannah teaches us that God does not measure prayer by the eloquence of your words, but by the sincerity of your heart. He heard her vow in the silence of her soul and answered with Samuel, the child who would not only remove her shame, but become a prophet to a nation, the one who would anoint Israel's kings, the one who would prepare the way for David, and ultimately for the Messiah. What does this mean for you? It means that in your barren places, in your seasons where words fail you, in your midnight hours when your heart aches but your mouth cannot form sentences, God is listening. Your silent cry may be misunderstood by people around you, but it will never be ignored by heaven. For when Hannah's silent prayer rose, it became the seed of destiny. And in the same way, your silent cry can birth something greater than you imagined. Healing, deliverance, breakthrough, even the shaping of history itself. The people of Israel stood trapped between an uncrossable sea before them and Pharaoh's army thundering behind them. Fear filled the camp, voices rose in panic. They turned on Moses, questioning, accusing, trembling at the thought of death in the wilderness. But Moses, though silent, lifted his soul toward heaven. He did not have words. He did not have a prayer he could speak aloud. He only had a cry, an unspoken desperation that rose from the depths of his spirit to the throne of God. And the Lord answered not with gentle reassurance, but with a command, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward." That moment reveals the power of a silent cry. Moses had no time for long supplications. He was pressed, broken, and desperate. Yet God heard the groan of his heart, and from that silent prayer came one of the greatest miracles in Scripture, the parting of the Red Sea. With a single raising of the staff, the waters opened, walls of ocean stood on either side, and a dry path appeared where there had been no way. The silent cry became the bridge to deliverance. What does this teach us? That God hears you even when you cannot articulate what you feel. When fear surrounds you, when your back is against the wall, when words fail but your soul is trembling in his direction, he listens. The unspoken prayer of your heart can split seas, break chains, and open impossible doors. Sometimes God does not wait for you to phrase the perfect petition. He answers the groan of your spirit. The Red Sea teaches us that faith is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent, trembling, but still fixed on God. Your silent prayer in the face of danger is a testimony of trust. And just as Moses discovered, when you cry out in silence, heaven can respond with power so great that even the sea must bow and make a way. Nehemiah stood in the palace of Persia, far from the land of his fathers. His heart was broken over the ruins of Jerusalem, the fallen walls, the gates burned with fire. He longed to see restoration, but he was only the cupbearer of the king, a servant with no earthly power to rebuild cities. Then came the moment of destiny. The king looked upon him and asked, "What is it you request?" Time seemed to freeze. Nehemiah could not speak recklessly. One wrong word before the king could cost him his life. He had no opportunity for a long prayer, no chance to fall on his knees, no sanctuary in which to cry aloud. Instead, in the span of a breath, he lifted his soul silently toward heaven. No one heard it, not even the king, but God did. In that heartbeat, Nehemiah released a wordless plea, and the Lord of heaven moved the heart of the most powerful man on earth to grant him favor. This was not a lengthy prayer, it was the prayer of a moment, of an instant. A silent, upward glance, a cry from the heart too quick to be spoken, but mighty enough to shift empires. From that brief, hidden prayer came the restoration of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the wall, the protection of a people, and the preparation of the way for the coming Messiah. What does this reveal for us? That God is not bound by the length of our prayers, but by the depth of our dependence. There will be times when you stand at the edge of a decision, when the door of opportunity opens, when you cannot afford delay. In that moment, your soul can breathe a silent prayer, and heaven will hear. You may not have the words, you may not have the time, but the God who searches hearts and weighs spirits needs only a breath of faith to act. So let us learn from Nehemiah. Do not wait for perfect conditions to pray. Do not think prayer requires hours of words to move heaven. Even in the throne rooms of this world, even in the split seconds of decision, you can lift your heart silently to the throne of God. And in a single breath, he can turn the hearts of kings, alter destinies, and set restoration in motion. Hezekiah lay sick upon his bed, the shadow of death hanging over him. The prophet Isaiah had already delivered the decree, "Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live." No appeal, no negotiation, no delay. It was the word of the Lord. To many that would have been the end. To Hezekiah it became the beginning of his most desperate prayer. But notice how he prayed. He did not rise to speak grand petitions. He did not summon priests or choirs to intercede with him. Instead, he turned his face to the wall. Away from the distractions, away from the watching eyes, he hid himself in the presence of God. And there, in silence, he wept. His tears became his prayer. His groaning became his cry. Without eloquence, without words, his heart poured itself out through the language of sorrow, and heaven listened. Before Isaiah had even left the palace court, God's word came rushing back. "I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears. Surely I will add to your days 15 years. Think of that. God did not say, "I have heard your words," but "I have seen your tears." Tears became prayer. Sorrow became intercession. Weeping became the petition that moved the heart of the Almighty. This is the mystery of Hezekiah's tears. Sometimes what you cannot speak with your lips, you declare with your tears. God counts them, treasures them, and answers them. The psalmist says he gathers them into his bottle, as if every tear you shed in faith is stored in heaven as a testimony that you trusted him even in your breaking. What does this mean for you? That the nights when you cried alone, when no one heard, when words would not come, those tears were not wasted. They rose before God as prayer. He sees the tears of the mother interceding for her children. He hears the unspoken cries of the one battling sickness. He catches the tears of those mourning, longing, aching for deliverance. And just as he turned Hezekiah's tears into life, he can turn your tears into healing, hope, and new beginnings. Hezekiah's story reminds us that tears are not weakness in the kingdom of God. They are weapons. They are the language of the soul that bypasses human speech and reaches directly into the courts of heaven. And when offered before the Lord, even silent tears can alter the course of your destiny. Esther was thrust into a moment she had never asked for. A decree of death hung over her people. Haman's plot was sealed with the king's own signet ring. Though she was queen, she was powerless to overturn the law of Persia. To appear before the king uninvited meant death unless he extended the golden scepter. The weight of a nation pressed upon her shoulders. What did she do? She did not summon armies. She did not call for political strategy. Instead, she turned to the unseen weapon of heaven, prayer, but it was not loud, not public, not shouted from the palace walls. It was a prayer wrapped in silence, a cry hidden beneath fasting. For 3 days, Esther, her maidens, and the Jewish people of Susa ate nothing, drank nothing, and let their hunger become intercession. Their silence thundered louder in heaven than all the decrees of Persia. Esther understood a mystery. Sometimes the greatest prayers are not the ones spoken, but the ones lived. Fasting is the body's silent prayer. Each hunger pang becomes a cry. Each weakness becomes a petition. Each moment of denying self becomes an offering rising before God. Though Esther's lips may have been still, her spirit was interceding with every heartbeat. And God was listening. At the end of those 3 days, she clothed herself not only in royal garments, but in the covering of prayer. She entered the throne room, not knowing if she would live or die. But heaven had already moved. The king extended the golden scepter, favor was granted, and the decree of death was overturned. The silence of prayer had spoken louder than the schemes of Haman. What the enemy sealed with his signet, God reversed through a queen's hidden intercession. This is the power of Esther's silent prayer. What is birthed in hiddenness can alter the course of nations. What is done in secret fasting can overturn decrees written in stone. Her story reminds us that some of the greatest victories are not won in courts, in battlefields, or in public squares, but in the secret places where men and women choose to humble themselves before God. What does this mean for you? It means that when the verdict is against you, when the world has written you off, when laws and powers are aligned to crush you, you still have a weapon the world cannot silence. You may not be able to shout, you may not be able to speak, but you can fast, you can pray, you can lift the silent cry of your spirit before the throne of heaven. And the God who moved for Esther will move for you. Daniel was a man of exile, taken from Jerusalem as a youth, raised in the courts of Babylon, surrounded by pagan kings and foreign gods. Yet through every change of empire, he remained unshaken in his devotion to the God of Israel. When the decree was signed that no one could pray to any god or man except the king, Daniel did not argue, he did not protest, he did not hide. Instead, he went to his upper room, opened the windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed, as he had always done. But even more than the words he spoke, it was the prayer of his heart that sustained him. Daniel understood that prayer was not merely about sound, it was about posture. His heart was always bowed before the Lord, even when his lips were silent. He prayed in the secret chambers of his spirit as he walked, as he served, as he stood in the presence of kings. And when he was cast into the lion's den, surrounded by hungry beasts, his lips may not have uttered a single sound, yet his heart was praying. Heaven heard, and the mouths of lions were shut. This is the mystery. Daniel's prayer did not end when he left his upper room. His very life was a continuous prayer, a heart that beat in constant communion with God. That is why no law could silence him, no decree could stop him, no lion could devour him. For his prayer was not confined to words, but lived in the silence of his spirit. What does this reveal for us? That true prayer is not bound by circumstances. You may be in a place where you cannot speak aloud your faith. You may be surrounded by pressure, hostility, even danger, yet no law, no enemy, no power can silence the prayer of your heart. You can walk into your workplace, into your school, into the darkest valleys of your life, and still be lifting silent petitions to the God who hears. Daniel's story teaches us that the strength of prayer is not in how loudly it is spoken, but in how deeply it is rooted. His silent prayer in the den was as mighty as any spoken cry, because God does not need volume to hear you. He needs sincerity. And just as he shut the mouths of lions for Daniel, he will silence the things that rise against you when your heart remains steadfast in prayer. In the Garden of Gethsemane, beneath the olive trees, the weight of eternity pressed upon Jesus. The disciples slept, unaware of the cosmic battle unfolding only steps away. The air was thick with sorrow, his soul exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. He knelt down, and though a few words were spoken, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Most of his agony was carried in silence. His sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. It was not the sound of his words that shook heaven that night, but the depth of his surrender. Gethsemane was not about eloquence, it was about yielding. In the silence of his groaning, Jesus bore the weight of every sin, every shame, every sorrow that would ever fall upon humanity. The Son of God prayed the kind of prayer that words cannot hold, anguish too deep, surrender too absolute, love too infinite to be fully spoken. Heaven heard the silent cry of his spirit and sent an angel to strengthen him. Even the silence of his submission carried the force of redemption. This moment teaches us that the greatest prayers are not always those filled with words, but those marked by surrender. Jesus shows us that prayer is not simply asking but yielding, laying down our will for the will of the Father. In that garden, in the silence between his groans, he won the victory that would be completed on the cross. Gethsemane was the place where silence became strength, where surrender became triumph, where a quiet yes, in the Spirit, shook the powers of darkness. What does this mean for us? It means that your most powerful prayers may not be the ones you shout from the mountaintop, but the ones you whisper through tears in your garden of trial. It means that when you cannot find the words, your surrender speaks louder than anything you could say. The battle is not always won in the noise, but in the stillness of giving everything over to God. In Gethsemane, Jesus showed us that prayer is not measured by the length of our sentences, but by the depth of our surrender. And if in the silence of his agony he could take on the sins of the world, then in the silence of your surrender, God can bring redemption, healing, and breakthrough into your life. On the cross, the Son of God hung between heaven and earth. His body broken, his breath failing, his blood pouring out as the lamb of sacrifice. Some words he spoke, "Father, forgive them. My God, why have you forsaken me?" And finally, "Into your hands I commit my spirit." But much of his prayer was beyond words, carried in the silence of suffering, in the gasps between breaths, in the surrender of his spirit. That silence spoke volumes. Every drop of blood that fell to the ground was a prayer. Every groan of agony was an intercession. The silence of his obedience thundered louder than all the voices of men and angels combined. It was the unspoken prayer of love, the prayer of sacrifice, the prayer of redemption. Heaven heard, and the veil of the temple was torn in two. Earth shook, rocks split open, graves gave way. All creation responded to the silent cry of the Son of God. This was not a prayer of requests. It was a prayer of offering. Jesus did not merely speak to the Father. He gave himself fully as the prayer. He became the sacrifice, the intercession, the bridge between man and God. His silence on the cross was not empty. It was filled with purpose, filled with victory, filled with the weight of salvation. What does this mean for us? That your greatest prayer may not be the words you say, but the life you live, the surrender you offer, the silence in which you trust God when nothing makes sense. The cross teaches us that sometimes the prayer that changes everything is not spoken but embodied. When you say with your life, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," the unspoken prayer of Jesus on the cross became the loudest proclamation in history. Sin defeated, death conquered, salvation accomplished. And now, because of that silent prayer, your cries, whether spoken or unspoken, can reach the very throne of grace. The Bible shows us that silent prayers move mountains, part seas, open doors, extend life, deliver nations, shut the mouths of lions, and bring salvation to the world. Do not think God hears only what you say. He hears what you cannot say. He hears the sigh, the tear, the groan, the whisper, the longing, the surrender. So let us live as Hannah, as Moses, as Esther, as Nehemiah, as Hezekiah, as Daniel, as our Messiah himself, knowing that the greatest prayers are not always spoken, but lived, wept, whispered, and carried in silence to the throne of heaven.